The winter wind cut through the quiet rural town like a knife, whistling down the deserted streets where fresh snow lay unbroken. Porch lights glowed faintly behind frosted windows, but outside, the world felt frozen in time. The only signs of life came from the small brick police station on the corner of Main Street, where a handful of officers sat in heavy silence. The heater hummed low, filling the room with a dull warmth, but even that couldn't drive away the deep stillness that hung in the air. Suddenly, crash, the glass door flew open, slamming against the wall with a jarring crack. A rush of icy air burst inside, carrying with it a small, trembling figure. The officers shot to their feet, startled. It was a puppy. He stumbled forward clumsily, his paws raw and red from the frozen pavement. Clumps of snow and ice clung stubbornly to his matted fur. His ribs pressed sharply against his thin skin, proof of hunger and neglect. For a moment, he just stood there in the center of the room, chest heaving, tiny body quaking under the fluorescent lights. The officers exchanged confused glances. A stray in this weather? In here? Before anyone spoke, the pup let out a sharp bark, his voice cracking with desperation. Then, astonishingly, he rose onto his hind legs, wobbly but determined, and pressed his two front paws together in a gesture that looked uncannily like prayer. The room fell silent. His dark eyes glistened, pleading with a depth no man in the room could ignore. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. One or two even chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off, but one man didn't. He was tall, broad-shouldered, in his mid-30s, his navy blue uniform neat and pressed. Officer Daniel Hayes had seen strange things in his career, but this stirred something deeper, an ache he couldn't explain. He pushed himself up from his chair, boots creaking on the wooden floor, and crouched low, his eyes level with the puppy's. The pup whined softly, repeated the strange prayer-like motion, then spun toward the door. He stopped halfway, turning back, eyes locked on Hayes, as if to say, "Come, now." Hayes's gut tightened, his instincts flared hot. "He's trying to tell us something," he said firmly, his voice slicing through the room. Without hesitation, he grabbed his winter coat and pulled it over his shoulders. Two of his colleagues, Officers Miller and Grant, followed suit, their expressions wary but obedient. The door slammed shut behind them as the frigid air swallowed them whole. The puppy sprinted ahead into the snow, his small paws punching frantic patterns into the white. The officers trudged after him, their breaths smoking in the icy air, radios crackling faintly against the eerie quiet of the night. They followed the pup for blocks until the town lights faded, swallowed by the vast, empty fields. Suddenly, the stray veered sharply toward the roadside ditch on the edge of town. His bark cut through the night, urgent, commanding. Hayes's eyes locked on the dark shape half buried in the snow. His heart lurched. An elderly man lay crumpled in the ditch. His clothes were woefully thin, his skin pale against the snow, lips tinged blue, his chest barely moved, shallow, fragile breaths fading fast. He had collapsed in the cold, his body surrendering to the merciless winter. The puppy raced to him without hesitation, curling his tiny frame against the man's chest as though trying to share his warmth. Then, as if begging for help, he rose once more onto his hind legs, pressed his paws together, and looked at the officers with tear-bright eyes. Hayes dropped to his knees in the snow. He tore off his glove, pressed two fingers to the man's neck, and held his breath. For a moment, nothing. Then, faint, a thrum, a pulse, weak, but there. "He's alive," Hayes roared, urgency flooding his voice. "Get the ambulance, now." Miller fumbled with the radio, shouting into the receiver for emergency response, while Grant yanked off his heavy jacket and draped it across the man's frail body. Hayes pulled the man closer, cradling his head, trying to shield him from the wind. The puppy never left his side. He licked the man's frozen face, pawed at his chest, refusing to let him slip away. His own body trembled with cold, but his spirit was relentless. In the distance, faint sirens began to wail, low at first, then swelling, breaking the silence of the winter night. Red and blue lights painted the snow as the ambulance screeched to a halt on the roadside. Paramedics leapt out, rushing toward the ditch with blankets and equipment. Hayes lifted the frail man carefully, helping the medics secure him on the stretcher. The man's eyelids fluttered, a faint groan escaping his lips, a fragile sign of life. Relief washed over the officers like a tide. But as the paramedics loaded the man into the ambulance, all eyes drifted to the little stray. He sat in the snow, his paws raw and bleeding, his body still trembling, yet his gaze never left the man he had saved. One medic crouched beside Hayes. If it weren't for that dog, he'd have been gone by morning. Hayes looked at the pup, this tiny creature who had braved the storm, walked into the station, and begged for help in the only way he knew how. His throat tightened. Without a word, he reached down, scooped the puppy into his arms, and pressed him against his chest. The little body sagged into him, exhausted but finally safe. Hayes whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "You're coming home with me." The ambulance pulled away, sirens fading into the distance. Snow drifted gently from the sky, soft and silent, as though the storm itself had stilled to honor the small, shivering hero who refused to give up.
The wail of sirens split through the icy silence, echoing down the empty street like a cry for life itself. An ambulance swerved to a halt, its red and blue lights flashing wildly against the snow-blanketed ground. Paramedics leapt out, their boots crunching on frozen pavement as they hurried with a stretcher toward the motionless figure of the old man. They worked quickly, yet gently, their gloved hands lifting his frail body and wrapping him in thick wool blankets to shield him from the cold that had nearly stolen his breath. An oxygen mask was fitted over his face, the hiss of air rushing into his lungs carrying with it the fragile promise of survival. But amidst the chaos, a desperate sound cut through the frantic barking of the stray puppy. He lapped and whined, claws scraping against the stretcher as if refusing to be left behind. His small frame trembled, but his spirit burned unyielding. The officer who had first seen trust in the pup's eyes stepped forward. His voice was steady, almost commanding. "Let him ride along. He found him." The paramedics paused, exchanging looks. Then, with a silent nod, they lifted the puppy inside. Within the ambulance's warmth, the stray pressed himself against the old man's side. His tiny body, shivering moments ago, grew still, as though sensing that his task was not yet finished. He did not take his eyes off the man's face, guarding him with a loyalty that seemed impossible for a creature who had once known nothing but the streets. Hours later, under the soft glow of hospital lights, the elderly man stirred. The steady beep of the monitor quickened as his eyes fluttered open. He turned his head, disoriented, until his gaze fell upon the small figure curled up beside him. The puppy did not move. He simply watched, waiting. His dark eyes reflected something wordless, something eternal. The old man's lips trembled, and tears welled as realization dawned. He had not been left to die, not been forgotten. With shaking fingers, he reached toward the little stray. The puppy rose, balancing on his hind legs, pressing his tiny paws together as if in prayer before collapsing into the man's frail embrace. A quiet whimper escaped him, not of fear, but of relief. In the doorway, the officer stood silently. His usual hardened expression had melted away, replaced by awe. His eyes glistened, and his chest rose with a deep breath, as though he too was humbled by the miracle unfolding before him. He knew he was witnessing something extraordinary, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Because here was a truth too profound to ignore. A stray, with no home, no name, and no master, had chosen compassion, and in doing so, he had saved a man's life. Word of the event spread quickly through the town. People called the puppy a hero. Some said fate had guided him. Others whispered that angels sometimes wear fur. Yet, the little stray seemed uninterested in the praise. He wanted no reward, no recognition. All he wanted was simple and pure, that the old man should live. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes the smallest lives carry the greatest courage, that even those who have nothing can give everything. Thank you for being part of this emotional story. If you, too, believe that love and compassion can rise from the most unexpected places, share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes, it takes the smallest of creatures to remind us of the biggest truths.
If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.